Welcome to The Human Element, presented by Whisk. I'm your host, Barb Bidan, and in each episode, I sit down with CHROs and senior HR leaders to explore how AI, innovation, and human insight are reshaping the future of HR. We'll explore how technology is reshaping leadership, strategy, and the role of HR by sharing candid stories, practical ideas, and strategic perspectives to help you shape the future. The Human Element is brought to you by Whisk, the leader in Agentic HR and creator of Harper, the world's first AI HR generalist. Learn how Harper can resolve up to 80% of routine HR tasks autonomously. Learn more about Whisk at whisk.com. My guest today is Azurée Montoute-Lewis, who is the Global Chief People Officer at Burson, one of the world's leading communications and public affairs firms. Operating at the intersection of two things that don't always go together well, the speed of AI adoption and the slow and careful work of building trust, inclusion, and psychological safety inside a global organization. At Burson, getting AI right isn't just an internal HR challenge, it's reputationally consequential. And that means that the standards that Azurée holds herself to on governance, ethics, and human judgment need to be very high. And she's also had to move from pilots to platforms, so still moving fast while keeping those standards intact. So today we're going to get into what it actually takes to do all of that work. Azurée, welcome to The Human Element. I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
Yes, thank you so much. And very nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be a part of this conversation because I feel that every meeting and every conversation surfaces around AI for us and kind of the future of work. So really exciting to talk about it. And this is actually a very human-centered conversation that we're going to have. So really looking forward to that.
We will 100% keep it human-centered, I promise. So that our listeners can get to know a little bit more about you, to start, can you tell us a little bit more about your role at Burson and the types of challenges that you're facing leading a firm where communication and reputation are the actual product?
Yeah, absolutely, Barb. And thank you. So I serve as Burson's Global Chief People Officer, and I've been in the role since our inception in the middle of 2024 when we brought two legacy agencies together to form a brand new third thing, what we like to consider the modern global communications firm, really set up for the future. We operate really at the intersection between reputation, creativity, earned media, and really, like so many of our clients, we're going through a measure of transformation as well. But at this core, we're a people business. So my remit is everything from talent acquisition to learning and development, diversity, equity, and impact and inclusion, operations and people analytics and workforce planning. And the list, frankly, goes on and on. I feel like the CPO role continues to evolve over time, which is interesting and exciting for me as I consider myself a bit of a builder. But what makes our environment, I think, particularly unique is that communication is not something we just do for our clients. It's how we also operate internally with our employees. So many of the leadership decisions that I make, that my C-suite leaders make, all the changes that we go through, every talent conversation that I work with my regional leads to come together, there are people behind the words. There's consistency and credibility that's required to operate at the intersection of reputation and creativity, not just for our clients, but for our internal employees. So I think because our clients trust us with both promoting and protecting their reputations, we also have to be really intentional internally with all the work that we do to make sure that we create environments that are safe, where people feel connected to our purpose, and really we bring people along on the journey. There's a lot going on in the world. We feel like we're always in the midst of change, and really keeping us on the journey together. That's where the real work is.
I mean, so important to hold yourself to the same high standards around communication and how you approach the work internally, right? As you hold yourselves to the external work that you do with clients. I love that. So, speaking of getting into change and how we work teams through change, most organizations are somewhere between this stage of experimenting with AI and actually scaling it. What does that take to make that move, in your opinion? And what do you think starts to break when you try?
It's actually interesting because what I think people think about AI, they're thinking of is as a technology. It's a brand new technology. It's going to help enable this new way of working. And that's true. But in reality, what it's forcing us to do is change our operating models. And I think that's the part that companies who are just at the beginning of the journey are starting to learn and understand, which I think is what makes it exciting. When you think about, you talked about pilots of platforms, when you think about particularly for Burson, what we've done, we started by doing pilots to figure out how things would work and what inputs we could put into the system and really understand the impacts that they're having. And it's good because they're controlled, right? You have usually people who are very early adopters who are ready to lean in, who are really forward thinking about what AI could do. Then you have that kind of the middle people that say, oh, my friend told me that this is good. I'm starting to play with it and experiment it. But when you ultimately try to scale it, you start to think about how does this actually work within our systems? How does it work across teams? I mean, we're an organization that is very, very globally dispersed, right? We have a lot of different markets, a lot of different offices, which also means that there are different cultures, different teams, different ways of accomplishing work, and all may be relevant and appropriate for where they sit. But how do you ensure that everyone has a threshold, a minimum threshold for how to really operate within AI? And I think that's where organizations start to break, right? They start to forget, if you will, the nuance between what happens. And so in our experience, and then when I talk to my other colleagues who are also on a similar journey, it's about ownership, like really who has ownership. We have a very highly skilled, competent innovation team that has been driving and been sponsors of this work. But as you move around the world and different people have different levels of comfort, that's where ownership starts to get a little bit more cloudy. And really, how does that work? Something that's near and dear to my heart, which I talk about with my people leads all the time, is just data. We just don't have the same accurate, timely, complete data everywhere around the world. And how do you make informed, data driven decisions without having really strong, consistent data, which is the other one? And then, frankly, as I mentioned before, we are in what I consider a constant state of change, and everything is moving so very fast. I talk to teams everywhere about how they're feeling overwhelmed. There's fear of burnout, there's concern about well being. And I think what we're experiencing now is a bit of change fatigue, right? So, AI, even though we recognize the importance and know what it's going to do to make us a better, faster, more productive, higher quality, all the positive words, it's another change for people to adopt and take on. And so I think that's where you tend to find people struggle a little bit, where companies will stall on that. But I think ultimately, what the idea of innovation is way more exciting, the actual execution. And when people start to realize that really AI and other innovative changes how work gets done, that's when the rubber meets the road and you start to see disparate outputs as you go on these journeys. But that's what I think it really starts to put tension in the system.
When you need to actually start to do differently or behave differently. And you mentioned a minute ago
Yeah,
the sort of different stages of adoption, right? Like you've got the early adopter, you've got the person who's
mhm,
maybe AI curious, right? Their friend talked
right.
about it, etc. Also, the global audience, like differing views there. How are you thinking about addressing all of those audiences and bringing them along this big change curve that we're facing?
Yeah, and it's an excellent question. And so I tend to be a little bit biased towards things that we can measure and actually directionally say that things are improving or we're having impact. And so, just interacting with AI is not the metrics. Just adopting AI is not what we're looking for. That is kind of the initial early indication. But when you think about what's going to make a material business for all of our organizations and how we get work is our decision, are we getting to decisions faster? Is our work quality improving? Are managers able to manage agents and manage workflows more effectively, more efficiently? Are we reducing time? Like there's a lot of friction in organizations through our processing. Like, are we reducing the amount of time it takes for us to get from point A to point B? What I told my employees about all the time is there's an unlocking capacity. If we use new innovative technologies like AI, does it free up our time to be much more strategic, much more thoughtful? Can we devote our time to much more higher value tasks and activities? Like those are things that really matter. And those are the signals and the pieces that we really should be focusing on, because that is what's going to actually drive the real change we're talking about. We have to go a little bit deeper below the surface than the surface metrics of whether or not we're using it. But how is it impacting us positively is where we have to put our attention.
Completely. And clearly, you're diving in deeply on the data.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if there has been a moment yet where the data or the feedback that you received since starting to kind of go down this AI path where it surprised you, where the data has really been like, huh, wasn't expecting that. And if so, how did that change your approach?
Yeah, it's interesting. What we found more often than not that the data is actually what I would say inconclusive, right? So the uplift and the improvements that we were expecting that people anecdotally feel we can't necessarily measure to the level of granularity just in how our business is structured to ensure that we're having an impact. So I think what it has forced us to do is explore if there are other ways of measuring the impact than what a traditional communications firm would look at. So we're exploring new metrics. Are there different ways we can get to this data? Then we're also just thinking about how do we more balance and equally weight how people feel about the work that they're doing and the assessment about the quality, and can we get at it on the end state from the end user, from our clients? Like, are they giving us feedback? Maybe it's not so much about the individual employee and the process they are doing, but maybe it's on the other side. We can find the impact further downstream, which is something that we're having to look at. So I think we're looking at not only how we're measuring to really kind of get past that. We're not sure if we're seeing what we thought we would see, right? But then
Mhm.
also looking further either upstream or downstream to see if the impacts are just not where we expected them to be. And I think that has altered our approach and altered how we started to think about how we actually measure the progress that we're making.
Got it. So let's go a little further down the path from early AI exploration into agentic AI. So systems
Mhm.
that act, not just assist.
Mhm.
That's like gone from conceptual, right, to
Mhm.
real reality, usable tools today, really, really fast. What do you think that means for a people leader? And how do you govern something that actually is advancing faster than your policy can cycle with it?
Yeah, I think what we're realizing is that as the technology improves and gets better, things are speeding up. And so whenever I talk to colleagues and other HR leaders at different points in the journey, they're realizing that which is viewed typically or traditionally as a very soft skill function, we're starting to dial up our operational capabilities and what we're able to do and understand, right? So moving from going from just AI that recommends things and is a thought partner for you, but to actually have agents that initiate, that prioritize, that analyze, and maybe even start to take action autonomously without human intervention. Like that is what I consider to be like the next frontier. And that's a very different conversation. I mean, we know on the upfront, it's about workflow, it's about insights about your talent, it's about individually customizing learning and development recommendations for our employees. Like these are all things that I think are traditional HR activities, but in reality, the way that we're able to now customize and individualize and to get very, very granular in the interventions as HR people, I think that's where we're starting to see an upskilling for HR and people leads to do that. When you think about governance, governance is something that I think is continuing to evolve because as the technology and tools evolve, so does the way that we have to interact with it and protect what we're doing. And so, one of the hallmarks, regardless of where you are on the journey, is really like transparency, which is one. Again, I don't foresee in the immediate future where we can completely remove humans from the process. We need to monitor for bias, we need to monitor for accuracy. There's a level of experience and expertise and nuance that AI hasn't quite gotten yet. So we're working on getting our leaders not only more comfortable with using it, but understanding how they can effectively leverage it and partner and see themselves as a part of the process. And that governance continues to evolve and the necessity for us to really create guardrails is the word I would use, guardrails around protecting not only the people, but also protecting the innovation, the work that it produces. Like I started the conversation with you about this being a very human-centered conversation. I think we're still in a place where we really need to continue to engage in human judgment. There's always going to be a place for that. And I think the risk that we have is going too far too fast with potentially removing the human interaction, but rather seeing it as an enabler and a partner. So I think that's
Mhm.
kind of wow, that continues to evolve and how we can continue to stay abreast. We're not going to be ahead, but we have to stay at pace, if you will.
Yeah. Well, so practically speaking,
Yeah.
and on that same note,
Yep.
what is a place where you either think or foresee or
Yep.
actually have AI
Mhm.
showing up practically in your workflows today, but
Mhm.
another place where you're drawing that line of
Yeah.
human autonomy is still needed here?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing. So, like, one of the things we started leaning into agents. So, my organization, through the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months, we've adopted AI. Okay.
Um, so as you think
Oh,
about that place where human autonomy is still needed, where is agentic AI starting to show up in your workflows within your team? And maybe as a contrast, a place where you've drawn the line and have decided that human autonomy is still needed here.
yes, absolutely. So when I think about it, we have really leaned into the agentic workflow. So I have an organization of 5,000 employees, but we've created 9,000 agents, right? And that just demonstrates how our employees are finding value in that. One of the places where we've also built an agent so far is on feedback. So we've been using an agent based on our feedback model and based upon our other learning and development initiatives that actually managers and employees can engage with an agent to actually have difficult conversations, right? So they're helping to give ideas, formats, flow, questions to really coach people so that they can help understand. So that's a very meaningful place that has allowed 24/7 for our managers and our employees to engage with an agent that's based on our process and what we do in a way to get coaching and development. So I think that's an easy way. And the feedback that we've gotten on that has been phenomenal. At the
Hmm.
same time, on the flip side, the contrast is when I think about things like calibration, when I think about things like succession planning, so AI will be able to take all the inputs like performance reviews, 360 feedback, tenure, time, all these inputs, and they'll be able to give you a readout of what they think based on all those metrics. But where we have to draw the line is there is nuance, is how leaders show up. It's about the behaviors that are only visible in interacting with leaders that can truly make the best decision. They'll be able to analyze the inputs and give you like, oh, this is the person. But in reality, what AI still lacks is the nuance and the real world experience to be able to make the best decision. So in some cases, we can use it for coaching and development to put our handbooks online for employees to ask questions about their benefits and things that are just very black and white. When you start to think about humans and human interaction and where humans need to lean in to create the kind of outcomes we need to drive as a business, that's kind of where we're still drawing the line, where AI can help, but ultimately we can't let AI make that decision.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing there is humans still decide. And also, even back to the feedback example, the AI tools are helping your leaders prepare for
Mhm.
very human, difficult conversations, but just to be more prepared for the human aspect and then still the human intervention at the end with actually delivering that feedback conversation to their team. So this kind of leads me into the thought of trust and safety a little bit. You cannot embed AI. I'm sure you're experiencing this. You can't embed AI in how people work without affecting how safe they feel.
Mhm.
How are you holding concepts like trust and inclusion at the center of what you're doing when the
Mhm.
tech is just moving as fast as it is?
Yeah. So, there's the old adage that basically culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So
Mhm.
the trust that you build with your employees is really the center of the game. Well, you'll start to see if you start to embed AI in places where people are very uncomfortable and you don't recognize it, what you'll see is there will reduce participation. People will shy away from it. They'll be overly cautious. They will actively resist, and if we don't tackle that head on like we did, if that is not the way forward, where you actually make it clear the role that this is going to play in their workflow, you'll get employees saying, like, is this AI going to replace me? Am I not going to have a job? Am I going to still be successful? Do I have a future here? And so when organizations move too fast without laying the groundwork up front to be upfront and honest and transparent about what the company is trying to accomplish, what we're hoping to get from this, which is really about unlocking capacity, unlocking potential, and like really uplifting the work that we currently do, doing just more and faster, then people will come along for the journey. If you don't do that, they will respond, they will have a fear response, a fear-based response, which will look like resistance and will not be successful. On the inclusion side, which is something near and dear to my heart, very early on when AI was introduced, we recognized that AI is built by humans, right? Is built on these large language models that have data from everywhere, but because it's human, inherently is going to be biased. And that's just something that we have to just accept. But what we do have to be mindful over time is really ask the questions, okay, how was this AI trained? What data, what voices, what aspects are not available, not currently there, and what's missing, right? Asking what's missing is another key question. Looking at what areas or what voices are underrepresented. Like, how do we ensure that what's coming out of the AI is accurate? Like, how are we auditing the outcomes? How are we stress testing this so we don't just accept what is put out carte blanche? And so I think when we think about inclusion and trust and psychological safety, it just reminds us to be curious. I think we have to ask the questions on how we got from point A to point B, just like we would do with offline work, right? When you're in the room and you're pitching ideas and you're ideating, you have to ask yourself, like, do we have all perspectives in the room? Is there an opportunity for us to make this better if we brought in a different angle, a different voice? And are we creating any disadvantage, even unintentionally? What does that look like? So I think so much of that work and what we do is for us to slow down, have milestone points where we check in, ask questions, we quality control what we're putting out there. And I think that helps to drive the trust because there are fail safes, for lack of a better word. There is going to be increased comfort that there's points we can ensure that we are making good decisions. And I think that is really what helps, that will help to drive us forward.
Completely. And that the inclusion lens, or even like a human taking the
Mhm.
time to step back and apply some of
Yep.
those inclusion questions, right, that we ask ourselves, right? That have we
Mhm.
invited everyone into the room, that sort of thing. That's actually like a great example of an agent or a tool minimally that could exist to run anything you're doing through, which is also really, really important. So you're doing lots of interesting stuff at Burson. You're operating at
Mhm.
scale and at a
Okay.
standard that most people leaders are still working towards, right? So I
Yep.
think you're gung ho down this path. What would
Okay.
you say is actually working well or most well at Burson right now, and what are you most focused on building next?
It's interesting. When we became a brand new company, and I always talk about how we see ourselves as a $1 billion startup, right? We brought two organizations together, and the first 2 years, we spent a lot of time building our culture and putting stakes in the ground about our values. I feel really good that we were extremely intentional about how we merged our culture and performance and our business strategy together. I think a lot of time those things operate in silos, but we really bring them together and we've embedded each of those aspects in every aspect of our business. And so I think there's been an intentional focus on our part to really lay a very, very strong foundation of our culture and our values and how those work together to marry with our purpose and what we're hoping to accomplish as an organization. So I feel really, really good about that. We spend so much time and so much work into doing that, and it's currently paying off. I think the other piece that we've invested in, I feel really good about, is our leadership capabilities. When we became a company, our CEO was very clear that he wanted us to be an organization of learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. We centered learning and our craft and our ability to serve clients at the center of who we are and what we do. And as we are a communications firm, we know that consistency matters, right? And we want to drive that through the organization, which I think is really important. So I think what we've done as an organization to center learning, to center our culture as a foundation and how we show up to the world is the part that I am really most proud about. And what I see on the AI side, what I see really helping us get on the curve is really just the readiness that we've created because we spent so much time up front really talking to our employees about what we were trying to accomplish, why we are doing this, what is the direction of travel that we're seeing in the outside world to really substantiate a business case, if you will, for what we are trying to do. And I think what I'm most excited about is that the organization is now demonstrating without our much intervention about how they're carrying that mantle forward as we continue to grow. So I think that's really the exciting work that we've been doing. And that's something I'm really proud of.
So we have covered a ton of ground. You're doing a lot of interesting work. That's allowed us to jam a lot of great ideas into the time we've spent together. I am going to move us on to a lightning round, which we do with all
Oh,
of our guests. So some quick hit questions
okay.
to kind of throw at you. So first, you talked a lot about data. So one metric that every people leader should be tracking on AI impact, and maybe most are not tracking right now.
Yeah. So I think for me, the most important metric is the quality on the other side, whether it's decisions, whether it's work, it's about the quality. Very early on, we were looking at time saved and time spent, which I think is interesting and helpful. But if it doesn't lead to better outcomes, then we're not really creating value, right? So I think decisions and the quality of those decisions, that outputs are the most important piece that we should be measuring as leaders.
Completely. So, biggest governance mistake that organizations are making right now.
I think governance can be a dirty word, if you will. Like people think governance is about policies and, defining process, but it really is about unlocking capability or driving consistency in a process. And I think governance actually creates a little bit more freedom, if you will, because now we are following a tried and true way of accomplishing something I think is good. So I think it shouldn't be looked at as a policy centered perspective, but rather a way for us to unlock capability and to operate just better as an organization.
Got it. So, what is one HR decision that AI should never make, period?
This might be a controversial one, right? But I think there are still many aspects of performance that we should not farm out to AI. I think when we think about how we make leadership decisions, the exposure, experience, and visibility we provide to our leaders that are going to drive outcomes, I think that's still one place that I'm personally not ready to give over that capability to AI to make the decisions. I think they can help on the front end of helping us to put the pieces together and make sense of all the inputs that we have. But I think human judgment and being able to make a final decision should be left to people, and HR should continue to drive that work.
Yes. And those are such important pieces of the human experience of our team members and working on our
Mhm.
teams that having a human involved in making evaluations relative to
Uh-huh.
your performance and being able to apply judgment critical. So, psychological safety in an AI embedded workplace, is it harder or easier to build than it was before?
I think because of how AI got started, I think it was much harder to create safety because I think there was anxiety about what this is going to mean and how this is going to work and what's in it for me or how will it impact me. So I think it was much harder to create that safety up front. We had to work to create that safety. And I think if you put the time in up front and created that trust and that transparency and that openness about the direction of travel, I think it's easier later. I think once you build it, then it carries through all the way through because you were upfront and honest about where you were taking it. So hard up front, but easier later.
Fantastic. This was a great conversation. I always try to do my best to wrap us up with some of my key takeaways from our conversation. So I have more on my sheet here that I am going to get to cover. But first, as the pace of change continues to pick up, you talked about your operational capabilities becoming key, even in your business as a fairly soft skills centric business. Operational efficiency, effectiveness, just being operationally sound is key. And so we started that from a place of your policy. How do you have your policies keep up? point is you need the operational practices to allow them to keep up with this fast pace of change that we are seeing. My
Mhm.
second one is a quick one. The idea of humans still decide. That came out clearly in a few places, right? That you are leveraging AI heavily, but humans are still involved in decision-making processes. So important. Third, you talked about data a lot, but what I really liked and something we haven't talked about explicitly on the show yet is places where you can use data to actually understand how people feel, right? I think we're
Mhm.
thinking about data in other places, but how are we measuring the things that are telling you how your people are feeling about AI adoption? Are they resisting? What do usage patterns look like? What are you seeing in their behaviors that help you understand the sentiment of your organization with respect to AI? And last but not least, another new idea that we have not talked about on the show to date is just the idea of applying the inclusion lens and how you both see a key human aspect of that, which I agree with fully, but also the ways in which AI can help you to ensure that you are building more inclusive programming and so forth within your business. And if you weren't doing that before, now there is no excuse because you can use AI to do it.
Yes.
I loved our conversation. I always leave guests with the last word. So I will ask you, what do you want an HR leader who just listened to us chat to go and continue to think about on the rest of their drive home?
I think if HR leaders walk away from this chat with one idea that I think has kept me focused is changing AI as a technology transformation and more of a leadership transformation, a capability transformation, operational transformation, and just always remembering that humans will always play a critical and central role in this work, no matter what happens and what the technology does. And I think we need to see AI as an enabler, not a replacement for humans and human decision making.
Absolutely. This was such a fun conversation. I'm so glad you joined me today, Azurée, and it was a pleasure to chat.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on The Human Element, presented by Whisk. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow The Human Element wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Barb Bidan. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.